Hello, I'm Asif, and welcome to the next video in the series Ideas That Shaped Companies. In April 1985, in a small office in Cambridge, England, an engineer named Sophie Wilson powered up a chip she had designed almost entirely by herself. Her colleague Steve Furber had built the hardware around it. The chip booted on the first try. This essentially never happens in a chip design. 40 years later, that chip's descendants run inside almost every device on Earth that has a battery. Every iPhone, every Android, every Apple Mac sold since 2020. More smartwatches, smart speakers, cars, drones, factory robots, and a fast growing share of the data centers training artificial intelligence. More than 250 billion chips have been built on the foundation Wilson and Furber laid in Cambridge. But here is the strange part. The company that owns their design doesn't manufacture a single chip. They have never sold a finished product to a consumer. They employ around 9,000 people in a market dominated by giants employing hundreds of thousands. So, how did a chip designed by two people in a Cambridge office in 1985 end up running the modern world, when the company that owns it doesn't even make chips? The answer is a single decision made by a single man. After the first real product built on Wilson and Furber's chip failed completely, to understand the decision, you have to understand the people who made it possible. Sophie Wilson and Steve Furber both worked at a British company called Acorn Computers, founded in 1978 by Herman Hauser and Chris Curry. Acorn had won a remarkable contract to build the BBC Micro, a computer the British government distributed to schools across the country in the early 1980s. The BBC Micro was the machine an entire generation of British engineers learned to code on. By the mid 1980s, Acorn needed a more powerful processor for the next generation of machines, and the existing options from Intel and Motorola weren't good enough. So Wilson, who had also designed the BBC Micro's programming language, sat down to design a processor herself. She drew the instruction set, the fundamental commands the chip would understand, on paper. Furber engineered the silicon implementation. They called it the Acorn RISC machine, ARM for short. The ARM-1 chip Wilson and Furber delivered in April 1985 was elegant in a way most chips weren't. It used far fewer transistors than competing designs, which meant it consumed almost no power. At the time, low power consumption was considered a nice to have. Within a decade, it would become the most valuable property a chip could possess. By 1990, Acorn was in commercial trouble, but the ARM team's work had attracted serious outside interest. Apple, then under CEO John Sculley, was developing a handheld product called the Newton, one of the first personal digital assistants. Apple's engineer needed a chip that could run on a small battery for hours. They tested every available processor. Wilson and Furber's design beat all of them. Apple proposed a deal. They would invest $3 million for a 30% stake in a new spin-off company built around the ARM team. Acorn would contribute the technology. A chip manufacturer called VLSI Technology would round out the partnership. The new company was incorporated in November 1990 with 12 employees. Apple insisted the acronym be changed. They didn't want Acorn in the name of their joint venture, since Acorn was technically a competitor. So the company was renamed Advanced RISC Machines, keeping the ARM acronym. The 12 engineers set up shop in a converted turkey barn in Cambridgeshire. To run it, they hired a man named Robin Saxby as CEO in early 1991. Saxby was an outsider, not a chip designer, but a salesman and an industry veteran from Motorola. And Saxby is the man whose decision is the answer to the mystery. The Apple Newton launched in 1993. It was a critical disaster. Reviews were dismal. Apple discontinued it within a few years. ARM's first major product, the chip Wilson had designed and Furber had built and Apple had bet on, was inside a commercial failure. The young company nearly went under in its first product cycle. Saxby looked at the wreckage and made the decision that defined the next 35 years. He realized that ARM could never survive by tying its fate to any single customer product. Apple could fail. Any single chip buyers could fail. If ARM was going to live, it had to be too widely distributed for any one customer's failure to kill it. So Saxby made a call that the rest of the chip industry considers borderline absurd. ARM would never manufacture chips. They would never even compete with their customers. They would license the chip design itself, the blueprints, to anyone who wanted them. Take our design, Saxby's pitch went. Modify it however you want. Manufacture it however you want. Wherever you want. Sell it under your own brand. Just pay us a small upfront license fee and a tiny royalty on every single chip you ever produce using our architecture. A few cents per chip. In 1991, every serious chip company was an integrated device manufacturer. Intel designed and manufactured its own chips. Motorola designed and manufactured. Texas Instrument designed and manufactured. The idea of making money purely by licensing intellectual property without owning a factory, without selling a finished product, was considered a hobby business. Saxby's bet was the opposite. He believed that the chip industry was about to fragment and that the company sitting at the center of a neutral provider would end up more durable than any vertically integrated giant. Through the 1990s, Saxby's strategy spread ARM designs quietly through the embedded systems world. Modern industrial controllers, tiny chips inside cars, each one paid ARM a few cents. The math multiplied across billions of decided devices started to compound in a way no one had anticipated. Then in 2007, Steve Jobs walked on stage and launched the iPhone. The processor inside it was based on ARM. Every smartphone built since, every iPhone, every Android, every Galaxy, every Pixel has used an ARM-based chip because Qualcomm, Samsung, MediaTek and eventually Apple itself all built on the architecture Saxby had licensed openly to anyone who would pay the royalty. In 2020, Apple started using ARM-based chips in their Macs, beginning the long migration of personal computing away from Intel and onto the architecture Wilson and Furber had drawn in Cambridge 35 years earlier. The honest counterpoint is that ARM's quiet position has made them a geopolitical pawn. In 2016, the Japanese conglomerate SoftBank bought ARM for over $30 billion. In 2020, Nvidia tried to buy ARM from SoftBank for $40 billion. The deal collapsed in 2022 after regulators in multiple countries blocked it. On the correct argument that Nvidia owning the architecture every other chip company dependent on would create an impossible conflict of interest. ARM went public again in 2023. There are also real questions about whether ARM can maintain its neutral identity as it now starts building its own chips for AI data centers, a move that arguably violates the original premise Saxby set in 1991. The deeper lesson is what Robin Saxby understood that almost no one else did. In 1991, every chip company was trying to be the next Intel. Saxby looked at his 12 employees, his one failed product with Apple, and his almost empty bank account, and decided ARM would not be the next anything. They would be the railroad tracks underneath everyone else's train. They would give up the glamour, the brand recognition, the consumer relationships, the high margins of selling finished chips. What they would get in return was permanence, a position so deep in the infrastructures of modern computing that no single competitor's success or failure could ever dislodge them. Sophie Wilson is now a fellow of the Royal Society. Steve Furber is a professor at University of Manchester, where he leads a project to build a brain-inspired supercomputer using the chip architecture he co-designed. Robin Saxby was knighted in 2002 for his services to the British technology industry. The chip Wilson and Furber drew in 1985 sits inside the phone in your pocket right now. The reason that drawing didn't end up as a footnote in some forgotten 1990s product is the decision Saxby made after the Newton failed. Don't compete, license, be the foundation, not the building. 12 people in a Cambridgeshire barn and one CEO who refused to play the game everyone else was playing ended up underneath almost every computing device on earth. The most valuable strategic position is sometimes the one that looks least valuable when you take it. Thank you for watching the video and make sure to like and subscribe.